The lost episode, The Empty Neighborhood, a horror story from the amazing world of Gumball that was never meant to be aired. It was a quiet Saturday morning in Elmore, the kind of morning where nothing exciting ever happens, and everyone stays inside watching TV or sleeping in. Gumball and Darwin had planned to spend the day playing video games, but when they woke up, something felt different about their house. The usual sounds of their family were missing. No loud crashes from Dad in the kitchen, no scientific experiments exploding from Anaisa's room, no Mom rushing around getting ready for work. The house was completely silent. Gumball stretched and yawned, his blue fur still messy from sleep. "Darwin, do you hear that?" he asked his orange fish brother, who was floating in his bowl next to the bed. "Hear what?" Darwin replied, his big eyes blinking in confusion. "Exactly. Nothing. No noise at all." They made their way downstairs, expecting to find their family in the living room watching TV or having breakfast. But the living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. Even Dad's favorite spot on the couch, where he usually left a permanent impression, showed no signs of recent use. "Mom? Dad? Anais?" Gumball called out, his voice echoing strangely in the empty house. The echo seemed to last longer than it should have, bouncing off the walls in ways that didn't make sense. Darwin floated beside him, growing more worried by the minute. Maybe they went out for groceries? But when they looked outside, the neighborhood was just as empty as their house. No cars in driveways, no neighbors walking their dogs, no children playing in yards. The streets of Elmore looked like a ghost town, as if everyone had simply vanished overnight. "This is weird, even for Elmore," Gumball muttered, stepping outside. The air felt thick and heavy, like breathing through cotton. The sky was an odd shade of gray, not quite cloudy but not clear either, as if someone had drained all the color from the world. They walked down their street, past the Robinsons' house, past the Bananas' house, past every familiar home they'd known their entire lives. But something was wrong with each one. The windows were dark, not just because no one was home, but dark in a way that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The doors looked slightly off, as if they'd been painted by someone who had never seen a real door before. "Darwin, look at the street signs." Gumball pointed up at the corner. The familiar street name was there, but the letters seemed to shift and blur when they looked directly at them, becoming readable only in their peripheral vision. As they continued walking, they noticed that the neighborhood seemed to stretch on forever. Streets that should have led to the town center or the mall instead curved back on themselves, creating an endless maze of identical houses with those same dark, wrong windows. "Gumball, I want to go home," Darwin said, his voice small and frightened. "So do I, buddy. But which way is home?" They had been walking for what felt like hours, but when Gumball checked his watch, the hands were spinning wildly, sometimes moving backward, sometimes stopping completely. Time itself seemed broken in this empty version of their neighborhood. That's when they heard it, a sound that made their blood run cold. It was Dad's voice, but not quite right. Too clear, too articulated, coming from somewhere behind them. "Boys? Where are you boys? Come home for dinner." They turned around, and there was Richard, standing at the end of the street. But he wasn't slouching or smiling his usual goofy smile. He stood perfectly straight, his pink fur unnaturally neat, his expression serious and focused in a way that Richard had never been in his entire life. "Dad," Gumball called out hesitantly. "Come home, boys. Your mother is waiting. We're all waiting." Richard's voice. The lost episode 2, The Mall. It was a Saturday afternoon when the Watterson family decided to visit Elmore Shopping Mall. What should have been a normal family outing turned into something far more sinister. As they pulled into the parking lot, Nicole noticed something strange. The vast concrete expanse was completely empty except for their car. For a Saturday afternoon, this was unusual. But Richard was already excited about the food court, and the kids were eager to explore. The automatic doors slid open with their familiar whoosh, but inside, the mall felt wrong. All the stores were open, lights blazing, cash registers ready for customers. But there were no customers, no employees either. The usual sounds of a busy mall chatter, footsteps, background music, were replaced by an unsettling silence. Gumball and Darwin headed to the arcade, their favorite spot. But something was terribly wrong. The arcade games were playing by themselves. Joysticks moved without hands touching them, buttons pressed without fingers, and the screens showed high scores with random letters and symbols instead of names. Meanwhile, Nicole tried to enter the grocery store, but the automatic doors wouldn't open for her. She waved her hands in front of the sensors, but nothing happened. Through the glass, she could see shopping carts moving by themselves down the aisles, with no one pushing them. Richard found himself in the food court, but it was empty despite all the open signs being lit. Tables and chairs were arranged perfectly, and on every table sat a single tray of fresh food with no one to eat it. The smell of cooking filled the air, but the kitchens were empty. Anais discovered escalators that seemed to lead to impossible floors. The mall directory showed only 3 floors, but the escalators continued infinitely upward, disappearing into darkness. Faint music came from the upper levels, the same tune playing over and over. When they tried to leave, they discovered the entrance doors had vanished. Where the exit used to be was now just a solid wall. They were trapped inside the endless mall. The store windows began displaying impossible things. Mannequins moved when no one was looking, clothes changed colors by themselves, and price tags showed amounts in currencies that didn't exist. In the electronics store, all the TVs were on, showing the same image security camera footage of the Watterson family walking through the mall, but from impossible angles, as if the cameras could see through walls and around corners. Then the PA system crackled to life with a cheerful voice. "Attention shoppers! The mall will be closing in never. Please continue shopping forever. Thank you for choosing Elmore Mall." As they tried to find another exit, they noticed the mall directory changing before their eyes. Store names rearranged themselves, floor numbers shifted, and arrows pointed in directions that led nowhere. In the center of the mall, they found a fountain that should have been filled with water, but instead contained a dark, thick liquid that moved like it was alive. Coins thrown into the fountain by previous visitors floated on the surface, but the dates on the coins were from years that hadn't happened yet. In the reflection of store windows, they could see other families shopping, families that looked exactly like them, but moved in perfect synchronization. These reflection families stopped when The Lost Episode, The Amazing World of Gumball, The Endless House. It was a quiet Sunday evening when Gumball and Darwin returned home from their weekend adventures. The familiar red door of the Watterson house stood before them, but something felt different. The air was too still, the shadows too perfect. As they stepped inside, the living room looked exactly as it always had: the orange couch, the television, the family photos on the walls. But the proportions seemed slightly off, as if someone had tried to recreate their home from memory and gotten the details almost right, but not quite. Gumball headed toward the stairs to go to his room, but when he reached the top, instead of the familiar hallway, he found another living room, identical to the one downstairs, but somehow wrong. Darwin called out from below, his voice echoing strangely in the impossible space. They discovered that every door, every staircase, every corridor led to another identical living room. The house had become an endless maze of the same space, repeated infinitely in all directions. No matter which way they turned, they found themselves back in that same orange-couched, photo-lined room. The family photos began to change before their eyes. Nicole's smile became too wide, stretching beyond the bounds of her face. Richard's eyes turned completely black, like empty holes in his head. And Anais appeared in photos where she had never been before, her expression blank and emotionless. Then they found their family. Nicole sat perfectly still on the couch, staring at nothing with unblinking eyes. She looked like a mannequin, completely motionless. When she spoke, her head turned with a mechanical clicking sound, her voice flat and emotionless. Richard stood in the exact center of the room like a statue, perfectly still, his eyes empty. He spoke without moving his lips, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Anais floated 3 feet off the ground, her books and papers orbiting around her like planets around a sun. She defied gravity, suspended in mid-air, her voice echoing from all directions. The windows showed their backyard, But it was wrong. The grass was too green, the sky too blue, and the yard extended infinitely with no fences or neighbors visible. Just endless perfect backyards stretching to the horizon. Clocks throughout the house showed different impossible times. Some showed 3:33, others showed 12 o'clock, and some showed impossible times like 25:99. None of the clocks were moving. Time had stopped in this place. Other versions of themselves began to appear, younger versions, older versions, versions wearing different clothes. These alternate selves looked at them with empty eyes and spoke in perfect unison, their voices creating an eerie chorus. The furniture slowly changed positions between rooms. The same couch, but in a slightly different position. The same TV, but at a different angle. The same photos, but in different arrangements. Subtle but unsettling changes that made each identical room feel wrong. Exhausted and defeated, Gumball and Darwin sat on the couch, realizing they might be trapped forever. The house was watching them, waiting for them to accept this reality as their new existence. The TV screen showed a live feed of them sitting on the couch, but in the TV there were hundreds of other identical living rooms with hundreds of other Gumballs and Darwins, all watching TVs showing more versions of themselves. An infinite recursion of their own trapped existence. Then came the terrible realization. They weren't just trapped in an endless house. They had become part of the endless house. The lost episode of The Amazing World of Gumball that never aired. It was a Tuesday morning at Elmore Junior High, but something felt different from the moment Gumball and Darwin walked through the front doors. The hallways were unusually quiet, with only the sound of their footsteps echoing against the lockers. Miss Simeon's classroom was empty when they arrived, though her coffee was still steaming on the desk, as if she had just vanished mid-sip. Darwin noticed it first. The family photos in the hallway display case were wrong. Instead of showing happy students with their families, every single photograph showed the same thing. Empty rooms with chairs pushed back, as if everyone had suddenly stood up and walked away. Gumball laughed it off, but his voice cracked slightly when he tried to make a joke about it. During lunch, the cafeteria was packed with students, but nobody was eating. They all sat perfectly still, staring at their untouched trays with wide, unblinking eyes. When Gumball tried to get Penny's attention, she turned toward him with that same vacant stare, her mouth moving silently as if she was trying to speak, but no words would come out. The strangest part was the new student who appeared in their afternoon class. Nobody had seen him before, but somehow everyone seemed to know his name was Marcus. He sat in the back corner, never speaking, never moving, just watching everyone with eyes that seemed too large for his face. When the teacher called on him, Marcus would simply point to another student, and that student would answer instead, always giving the exact same response in the exact same monotone voice. That afternoon, Gumball and Darwin decided to follow Marcus home. They watched from a distance as he walked through the empty streets with jerky, unnatural movements, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. He led them to an old abandoned house on the outskirts of town, its windows boarded up and yard overgrown with weeds. In the basement, they discovered the truth. Marcus stood among dozens of old television screens, all showing surveillance footage of the school from above. The students moved like tiny figures in a maze, following invisible patterns. Marcus himself was no longer recognizable as human. His form shifted and blurred like a badly tuned signal. They ran. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs gave out. The next morning, everything was back to normal. Marcus was gone, as if he had never existed. The teachers had no memory of him. The students acted like nothing had happened. But sometimes, when Gumball and Darwin looked carefully, they could still see the patterns, the invisible strings, and they knew that somewhere Marcus was still watching.
The lost episode of The Amazing World of Gumball that never aired. It started when Gumball found an old yearbook in the school library that nobody remembered being there. The pages were filled with photos of students he'd never seen before, all wearing the same uniform as Elmore Junior High. But something was wrong with their faces. They all had the exact same smile, perfectly identical, stretching just a little too wide. Darwin noticed it too when Gumball showed him during lunch. The orange fish pointed at one particular photo, a blue cat that looked exactly like Gumball, but with that same unsettling smile. The name underneath read, Gumball Watterson, class of 1987. But that was impossible. Gumball was only 12 years old. Miss Simeon snatched the yearbook away when she saw them looking at it. Her usual grumpy expression was replaced by something Gumball had never seen before: fear. She locked the book in her desk drawer and told them to forget they ever saw it. But forgetting became impossible when they started seeing those students in the hallways. At first, it was just glimpses. A flash of that identical smile disappearing around a corner. The sound of footsteps that didn't match any visible students. Lockers opening and closing by themselves. Then Penny approached Gumball after class, but her usual sweet voice sounded different, mechanical. When she smiled, it was that same perfect, too-wide smile from the yearbook. The next day, more students had the smile. Tobias, Carmen, Banana Joe, one by one they were changing. They still acted normal, still talked and laughed, but their smiles never wavered, never changed. Even when they were supposed to be sad or angry, that smile remained frozen on their faces. Gumball and Darwin tried to tell Aeneas, but when they found her in the library, she was reading the same yearbook. She looked up at them with that terrible smile and said in a voice that wasn't quite hers, "Don't you want to be in the yearbook too? Don't you want to belong?" The brothers ran home, but their house felt different. Family photos on the walls showed the Wattersons with those same smiles. Nicole was cooking dinner in the kitchen, humming cheerfully. But when she turned around, her face wore that identical expression. Richard sat in his chair, watching TV, that smile never leaving his face even as he laughed at the show. Gumball grabbed Darwin and they hid in their room, but even there they weren't safe. Their reflections in the mirror began to smile that smile. Even when their real faces showed terror, the reflections moved independently, waving at them, beckoning them to join. The yearbook appeared on Gumball's bed, open to a page with two empty spaces. One labeled Gumball Watterson, and another labeled Darwin Watterson. As they watched in horror, their photos began to materialize on the page, but their faces in the pictures were already wearing those perfect, identical smiles. Darwin's reflection stepped out of the mirror first, that smile stretching across his orange face. Then Gumball's reflection followed, both of them reaching toward their real counterparts with arms that moved too smoothly, too perfectly. The real Gumball and Darwin backed against the wall as their smiling doubles approached, speaking in unison with voices that sounded exactly like their own, but somehow completely wrong. "Join us," they said, their smiles never wavering. "Be perfect. Be part of the yearbook. Be part of Elmore forever." The last thing Gumball remembered was the feeling of that smile spreading across his own face, unstoppable and permanent. When he looked in the mirror the next morning, he couldn't remember why he had ever wanted to frown. The yearbook sat on his nightstand,